Oh, dear old Big 12 Media Days, she's back. And all the Big 12 coaches were there along with their featured offensive and defensive players. So let's take a look at Sark's presser and what he had to say about the quarterback decision. Coburn had some solid quotes that gave us insight, and we got to hear from Bijan on what it means to be a featured back now. Oh, and of course, we will touch on the horns down Twitter firestorm ignited once again. Sheesh. I had to bring in Joe Cook over at Inside Texas to break it down since he was actually there and can give us the needed context. It's going to be a fun one. Go sign up at Inside Texas. The season's about to start and you'll need to know what's going on behind the scenes with the program. It's an excellent resource for the fans and a great way to take your fandom and football knowledge to the next level. And while you're at it, go grab you a brand new UT hat for the season. Last Stand Hats is offering any Texas Homer viewer 10% off their hat purchase with promo code TexasHomer. All caps, at laststandhats.com. Like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell to help the channel grow. I always appreciate it. Now, let's talk Big 12 Media Days and the interesting storylines that came out of it. Without further ado, let's get into it. Joe, what's up, brother? I'm glad you came on. You're always at UT events covering games and bringing us back the updates, and I appreciate that. And for the people that don't know you in YouTube world, who is Joe Cook and what does he do?
Yeah, I'm the beat writer for InsideTexas.com. Been doing that since 2016. I cover football, basketball, baseball, recruiting. If there's Texas Longhorn sports, I'm probably there and writing something about it.
And you were over at the Big 12 Media Days at Jerry World this week. Bob Bowlesby, the Big 12 commissioner there, and he was taking questions, and he was talking about some contextual, bigger picture issues that can affect the sport. So when you were listening to Bob Bowlesby, what was the message?
So he basically had three different stories that he had to track: the remaining effects of the virus, name, image, and likeness, and the playoff. And the playoff was the one I really wanted to hear his thoughts about, just because he was in the room when the proposal for a 12-team expanded playoff was made. He and a few other athletic director or a few other conference commissioners and Notre Dame's athletic director were the one that submitted that. And I think that's why a lot of the national media, big voices like the Bruce Feldmans, like the Ivan Mizels, like the Max Olsons, that's why they were there, because he was in the room. And he had a quote. He basically said, "It's not about the money." And I think everybody turned some side eye to that and thought, when that scene from Spaceballs where Bill Pullman says, "It's not just about the money. We're doing it for a shitload of money." Like, that's come on, let's be honest here. But still, some of the questions involve, making players play extra games, since they are, even if they can get paid for their name, image, and likeness, the two issues are kind of correlated there. They are amateurs, and they don't get professional contracts, and they are just adding more games, more wear and tear. Football is a sport that comes with its associated risks, and adding more games to unpaid athletes is somewhat of an issue. Also, just what the mechanics would be. The Big 12 has either had 0 or 1 team in the playoff in recent years. And in the case of a 12-team playoff, there would be some situations where he believes that they would get 2 and sometimes even 3 into the playoff. And of course, he also talked about how it would help recruiting. Let's say Kansas State goes on a run like they did at the turn of the decade, where they are entering November the number 3 team in the country. That's not always going to be what Kansas State is, as we've seen in recent years after the end of Bill Snyder and the beginning of Chris Kleiman. But if they get a run and they go 9-3 and are competing for the Big 12 till the very end, and maybe top 15 OU team or a top 15 Texas team, that's a team that could be in the playoff. And he talked about how that, in theory, should create a little bit of a recruiting bump for everybody. Now that it's more than 4 and 12, potentially, it should help everybody.
It makes sense marketing wise. The more brands you can have associated with the playoffs will help. And I think it'll be fun. Have we had fun with the current format? Like, we can predict right now who gets into those games with high accuracy.
Not everybody is going to only watch, late November, early December. There are people like you and me who, if Buffalo is playing Northern Illinois, we'll probably watch it. But there's a crowd that only wants to see, great teams like Alabama, Ohio State, Clemson duke it out. And, I understand that perspective on it, but this is going to open it up, I think, a wider eye to more teams who are not always in that top 4 range, but are in that top 12 range pretty consistently. And now they have a little bit more hope that they could be finish the season with the number 1 by their name.
Yeah, and I think hope is the operative word because generally the top 4 teams will win the playoffs even with added seeds. Alabama still gets to be Alabama, but the number 9 team fan base also gets to be engaged past November. And now it wouldn't be preseason without horns down popping back up. And that quote was directly out of Big 12 media days by the head of officials. So you were there. How did that conversation actually come about?
So every year, the Big 12 coordinator of officials, I think his name's Ken Burks, offers a presentation. And some years it's just a rehashing of what we see all the time, and some years it's introducing some of the new rules for the season. And he takes questions, and there was somebody who asked him about horns down and if that would be an unsportsmanlike conduct penalty. And I think just from reading on Inside Texas, the background of the whole controversy about it being a penalty was I think a few years ago, Mike Davis scored a touchdown in Lubbock and holstered his guns, did guns down, and got flagged. And Mac Brown made a little bit of a, not a controversy, but made a point to where we have all these people doing horns down, we do guns down one time and we get flagged. He just wanted to see some consistency. It's grown into something from there, something that I think every Texas fan thinks is silly. I think Texas players think it's silly. I think Texas media thinks it's silly, but it kind of perpetuates this narrative that Texas, oh, it's soft, oh, it cares about these things, and it allows rivals who like aiming at the target on Texas back, whether deserved or not, to just keep firing shots at it. And I think you've seen people make some merchandise. I don't know. I think you've seen Texas players just note that, you know, if there's 50,000 people in a stadium doing it, you think they're going to curl up in a ball and cry? Like it is what it is, and it's a tired narrative that I think needs to be. It'll go the way of asking a Texas coach or Texas A&M coach, "Do you want to play the game?" I think it'll go away eventually, but while it's still going, it allows people like Baker Mayfield to get some retweets on Twitter, and for a few people to make some dollars in an entrepreneurial way with T-shirts and things like that. And Steve Sarkisian was asked about it, and he said, I think it's a sign that people know what we are, know that we are a big program and a big brand. But he mentioned our horns go up, and I think that's going to be every Texas fan's response to it. But it'll find its way to be a silly media narrative before too long. Once again.
I was getting into meme territory like Texas is back, but I've never seen them throw horns down when we win, so let's just win, man. Plus, it's WWE. Let's have some fun. There's 130 plus college teams out there duking it out, and some of them are not going to like each other.
But could you imagine if TCU started doing this,
or
Baylor started doing this, or OU fans started,
It's the conflation that bothers me. They say, well, you throw horns up and we throw horns down. So what's the difference? And there's a clear difference. One throws it up in support of one's own organization. The other throws it down specifically to denigrate a separate organization. I mean, watch any early 2010s Chief Keef video. They are throwing rival gang signs down. Are they doing that in support of the rival gang? No, it's called cracking, and they are cracking our signs. So we just got to be more intellectually honest about this, but still don't penalize it.
I think the way to look at it is the Dikembe Mutombo way of looking at things. Because when Dikembe had one of his thousands of blocks, he could do this to the fans. But if he did it to your face, he got teched right away.
And I think that's more reasonable. The question is, do we allow taunts in the game? Yes or no? So let's pick one and let's go with it. And of course, we had Sark at the main stage, and there's always a bit of coach speak. But what were we able to glean from Sark's press conference?
At least when he was talking to the big stage, I think he did what everybody expected he would with quarterback. He had to know he was going to get a quarterback question. And he's been a little bit more specific in these past couple of days than he had been in the past, mostly because there's more opportunity to ask him more probing questions. But he didn't tip his hand on who has done anything. He didn't give himself an opportunity to. But the way he phrased it, I thought was really interesting. He talked about he will make the decision when he can feel it in his gut. And there was something that he said that I really appreciated. He said, but at some point in training camp, I'm going to have to trust my gut, and I've got to name a starter. And when we do, it's not going to be because the other guy gave the job up. They're going to make it tough on me. That's what I told them. You guys need to make this decision as hard as you can on me. And I really appreciated that. He wasn't going to take an easy route. He wasn't going to pick someone maybe because they've been here longer or pick someone because of where they're from or anything like that. He said, look, I want this decision to be difficult. I want this to be something that I really struggle with. And he also basically took everything upon himself. Of course, he's going to have input from Kyle Flood and AJ Milwee, but this is going to be an executive decision. And he wants it to be a difficult one because if it is, that means both those guys are having decent camps and are doing good jobs in practice ahead of the first game. He didn't really give a timeline. I can assume he'd like to have it before they start preparing for Louisiana. So maybe 2 weeks before the first game, maybe a week and a half, something like that. But I was impressed by that he was fully aware and fully ready to take on a difficult decision.
Were there any other pieces from Sark's main stage?
Not really from the main stage, but when he did start to go back to transferring, we went to breakouts. He made the point, look, I may need 2 quarterbacks this year. And if your 2 quarterbacks are the starter and then a freshman in Charles Wright or Cole Lord, that's not a healthy quarterback room. So he made the point, and I think, of course, this is a sales pitch just for whoever does not win the job. Understandable, but it may not land. Look, I'm going to need you this year because what happens if you're one play away? That's what they always tell backups. You're one play away, and what if that play happens? So I think he understands the sales pitch he needs to put on after he names a starter. He knows what he's been around this situation before. He had to replace Matt Leinart. He had to replace Carson Palmer. He knows what he's doing here. Had to replace Tua Tagovailoa. It's just going to be a difficult situation, and the first one he's had as a head coach in a good while.
Yeah, it's a unique dynamic to manage. And Sark brought along 2 major representatives in nose Keandre Coburn and little-known player for Texas named Bijan Robinson. I believe he plays running back. And I'm excited to see Bijan being featured both on the field and in the media. Texas is putting him out front, and that's great. First, let's talk Keandre Coburn. He's a funny dude, and he also doesn't bite his tongue. You get a lot of really honest takes from Coburn, and that's rare because athletes today are so over-rehearsed it becomes nonsense. What did Coburn have to say? I saw a lot of quotes over on Inside Texas earlier.
Yeah, Coburn is a really hot, bubbly personality, great character, and a great guy. One of the things that stood out to me, and this speaks to his honesty, is he was asked what his first reaction was when Tom Herman was fired and Steve Sarkisian was hired. And he said, I was asleep. So that kind of tells you a little bit about him. If you want somebody to boost you up and give you a big boost of confidence, you call Keandre Coburn, because we asked him about offensive players, defensive players, and everybody sounds like they're having a pretty good time and doing very well if you ask Keandre Coburn. But I was really curious to know what he thought about his fellow defensive linemen, because that's an area I think is going to be a strength for the defense. I mean, you've got Coburn, Sweat, Tavondre Sweat, Alfred Collins, Moro Ajomo. That's a fearsome foursome there manning the middle. And no matter who the starter is or isn't, one of those guys is going to do well. And then you talk about on the edge, he was saying that Jacoby Jones at Jack linebacker could be the breakout team player on this defense. And then Ray Thornton, who could play X or a variety of positions, and Ovia Gofu, 2 transfers. Those were guys who had really come in and done well. So I wanted to know about his position group. I believe he told radio that he's down to 335 or something like that instead of his listed 348. But he still looks like he carries it well. And to sum up the defensive line group, somebody asked him about Bo Davis, and he said some of the things that guy says is rated R. Can't share it here. But he spoke a lot about everybody. I mean, he spoke highly of Bijan, quarterbacks, Xavier Worthy, a wide receiver, even got some mention by Coburn. But I was paying attention to what he said about the defensive line, and he felt pretty strongly that may be the best unit on that defense this year.
I could see them being the strength easily. And then we had Bijan's time with y'all, and Bijan is coming into being a known star, which is a different thing with different pressures. And after studying Bijan and making videos on him, you'll notice that he never had high attempts in high school, which is what's so insane, his production in high school with just an average amount of attempts. And this is the first time he's really going to have to pound the rock. And that's why I was so keyed into Bijan at Big 12 Media Days. And I think he did a good job too. He was getting comfortable with the press, not taking the bait. He's getting there. He's turning into what he's going to be in the NFL. So what did y'all hear from Bijan, and do the players have main stage events or they just do breakouts?
Players were just in breakouts. With Bijan, of course, he may have been the highest profile guy there, considering Spencer Rattler wasn't there, and just kind of thinking about the rest of the conference. So he was definitely the highest profile there that day, unless you want to make an argument for Spencer Sanders. So a lot of the questions about name, image, and likeness, and even the playoff came up about him. I mean, and considering you can pay about $150 to get a Bijan video on Cameo, that's going to be a pretty easy topic to ask him about. He was also asked about, a lot of what Texas football went through last year, all the way from January to January, and going through a new coach. But I was also paying attention to if he was ready to take on the feature back role. Sarkisian doesn't run the quarterback very often. In camp setting or in clinic settings, quarterback is the passer and the running back is the runner. So this is a guy who's going to be asked to do a lot this year, especially in an offense Steve Sarkisian described as a running offense in order to set up play action pass. And by everything Bijan said, he and the rest of the running back room, including Rashawn Johnson and Keelan Robinson, are ready to take it on. He spoke very highly about all his running backs who are probably competing for playing time this year. Even got a Jonathan Brooks mention in there as well. But Bijan knows he's going to be carrying the load a lot this year. He said, like you mentioned, he never really had more than 20 carries a game in high school. But he said he is making sure he has the endurance needed in order to maybe get 20, 25 touches. No matter what, he wants to be ready whenever he's asked, and he wants to be able to succeed at Texas.
Good stuff. And also, when you're not in front of the cameras, is Bijan that happy, smiling kid we see, or is he more quiet, reserved? Like, what's Bijan like behind the scenes?
I think last year, after that bowl game where he just went off against Colorado, somebody was joking with him about the only time you may not be smiling is when you're on the football field. And I'm lucky enough in the Texas press box to be situated right by the Spanish broadcast booth. I think they call him El Rayo, which is either the beam or the bolt of lightning or something like that. And I think that's a great nickname, but he's someone that is smiling all the time. Just one of the most positive dispositions of anybody I've ever interacted with. And he's really confident. And you can tell that whenever he steps between the lines, that smile goes away because he knows it's business time. But outside of that, there's a reason he is so easily going to become a great face for this program in these two, maybe three, probably just two more seasons that he's at Texas. But he understands there's a lot on his shoulders. And that's the reason I asked him if he's talked to Ricky or Williams or if he's talked to Earl Campbell, and he has in recent months. And so he has that perspective of two, worldly talented guys who did it at the highest level at Texas as to what it takes and what he needs to do in order to succeed at Texas. So I think a lot of people can be really confident that Bijan's going to have a really solid season, better than solid, hopefully, because he's going to be the guy carrying the load for this offense.
I'm really looking forward to watching him this season. And Joe, thank you so much for coming on. It's always great to have somebody that was actually there, because social media tends to distort a majority of what we read coming out of there. And you help me out a lot, and you always help out the fans by covering all the games. So please tell the fans where they can find you.
Yeah, you can see everything I do over at InsideTexas.com. You can follow me on Twitter at JosephCook89, and be sure to check us out. We got great things going on in the future. A lot of it has to do with what you're providing us. And thanks again for having me on. This is fun, and it's a sign of a lot of things to come for Inside Texas.
And that's a wrap for Joe. And this was only a bit of what you can read over on Inside Texas. They have all the quotes and storylines over on InsideTexas.com. And thank you for watching, and consider subscribing or joining as a channel member. As always, hook 'em.